All right, welcome. Good evening, everyone. Thank you guys so much for coming out this late on a Thursday evening. I'm sure you guys all have super busy lives and it's peak application season. So I wish you guys like the best of luck. Make sure to really take care of yourself during this time. I've been through it. I know how stressful it can be. So I just really want to emphasize your wellness and that school results don't define who you are. So like, please don't sacrifice any of the things that you enjoy. But at the same time, definitely start on those essays right now if you haven't, just because it gives you a lot of time to reflect, to perhaps reach out for feedback from any mentors, and to really let those essays sink in. And so without further ado, I'd like to share some of my personal journey towards medicine, as well as tips and tricks that hopefully will help you. So just important information, this seminar is recorded so you can access it later. At the end, I'll be presenting some information about the packages I have. And if you have any questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end, as well as you can always reach out to me, as well as other consultants via Accepted Together. All right, so a bit about me. I'm currently a first-year medical student at U of T. I completed my Bachelor's of Medical Sciences, which is a 4-year program at Western. And at Western, I did a double major in both physiology as well as IMS. And so in the previous cycle, I applied to 6 schools, which were the 5 Ontario ones, as well as UBC. And I consider myself very lucky and fortunate to have received acceptances to UBC as an out-of-province applicant, as well as to Schulich Medicine. And I was also waitlisted at Ottawa. Okay, so a bit about my pre-med journey. I'd first like to provide a disclaimer. I don't think that anyone here should necessarily copy what I did. I think that everyone has very unique strengths and interests. And so what worked for me might not necessarily work for you, or what makes me excited or what I'm passionate about might not be the same as yours. And I think that's totally okay. It's also cool if we do share any commonalities. Feel free to reach out to me about that. But in a nutshell, I studied a basic science degree where I was able to learn a lot of courses that really helped me prepare for the MCAT. So that includes biology, biochemistry, organic chemistry, and all that. And so I think going into university, I kind of had an idea that I wanted to focus on a career in science, whether that's related to healthcare, such as medicine, optometry, or dentistry. I think that was the direction that I wanted to go into. And I recognize that not everyone is lucky enough to be able to decide this early on. And that's totally okay. I have lots of classmates currently who have worked in society for a couple of years. They've had families already, they've done PhDs, and they're just starting medical school. And so I just want to reinforce the fact that even though you might feel like there is the pressure of time, to not bind that and to really treasure the current time you have before medicine. You have free time to be able to engage in extracurriculars, to perhaps like make some money, as well as travel around, and to really value that time. And I can tell you this now just because there is a lot of studying and work in medical school. So please don't feel rushed at all to get in immediately, even though I understand the sentiment. And so early on, I was able to establish some healthy study habits. And so for me, I think that really involved understanding my program. So for my program, there was a lot of test taking and multiple choice exams. So I was really able to get good at those skills and to try my best to like stay on top of things and not cram things last minute, which I often did in high school. And so being able to establish study habits are important just because GPA is such a big factor in Canadian medical schools across the country. And sometimes I wish this weren't the case, just because some systems aren't necessarily forgiving. But if you're early in your journey, or if you're looking for advice to maybe take a fifth year, I highly recommend that emphasis on GPA. But that said, GPA is not everything. It's only one variable in your application, and there's so much more that you can do to improve your chances. And so in terms of extracurriculars, I really recommend doing things that you truly like, and not because your friend is doing it or it might sound good on a resume. Just because if you're not fully interested in an activity, I think you're kind of wasting your time and you're not able to grow as much. And with the lack of enthusiasm, it won't be able to translate as well in your applications. And so for me, what I really enjoyed was a club called Crafting for a Cure in undergrad, where I was able to make crafts with seniors and kids at hospitals, just because I'm someone who really enjoys creating art. And so it kind of combined art, leadership, as well as community service for me. And I was able to start off as a coordinator and advancing to VP as well as co-president, and really show that growth throughout the 4 years of my undergrad. And similarly, I did that for an organization called the Biology Mentorship Program at Western. And so oftentimes biology in first year can be a bit of a learning curve. And so having benefited from mentorship from people with experience, I also wanted to give back. And to that end, I was able to run a lot of workshops, get myself out of my comfort zone, and present to hundreds of students biology concepts that I used to struggle with, as well as being really able to network with the professors in such a huge class. And so that was something that was very meaningful to me. And that was something that I engaged in for 3 years. And these two activities, I would say, kind of define my undergraduate career. I was able to use them a lot in all of my applications. And so, as you could tell, I'm very passionate about it, and I think they reflected pretty well. Yeah, so I highly encourage you to find clubs or initiatives, anything that you think you can invest a decent amount of time in. I think schools really like looking for the progression as well as growth. And when you invest so much time, you'll have a lot of stories to tell, as well as people that you've worked with, and how that helps you develop your character and prepares you for medicine. So a couple of other things that I did included being involved with the University Students' Council in terms of student government, and volunteering as a peer support helper to listen to students who are struggling. And I also engaged myself in wet lab research during my summers at Western. I was really able to network with my lab and get a really amazing connection and reference out of that. As well, I think since my youth, I often played a lot of piano as well as created art. And so these are kind of more unofficial hobbies that I still incorporated into my ABS as well as my NAQ for UBC. And so these are super long term. They were things that I started as a kid that I continue to do recreationally. And I think it's important to also incorporate like maybe 1 or 2 hobbies in your ABS to really spice things up and show that you're not just someone who is participating in official clubs or verified organizations, but you have other interests outside of academia or medicine. And so, sorry. I think in order to really become a well-rounded applicant, I also engaged in lots of volunteering initiatives, whether that's mentoring children from a tutoring perspective or volunteering at different hospitals, which is actually not necessary. You don't have to volunteer at hospitals to get into medical school, but really being able to engage myself in service ethic and to see which topics really matter to me. I think that will reflect well on your application. As well, I would always do my best to apply for any scholarships that were offered from my school, just because it helps you from a financial perspective, and it also looks really great on applications. And so in terms of other criteria that schools look for in the application process, there is the MCAT, which is a standardized test that consists of 4 different sections and takes around 7 hours to do. So the MCAT is quite a beast. Personally, I think as an applicant, that's the one area that I struggled with. I think I was able to maintain a strong GPA as well as be a well-rounded person with lots of activities. But for me, I was working full-time while balancing my MCAT. And so perhaps without the proper strategies, I didn't do so well on my first attempt. So I had to do it again and raise a particular section, which is totally okay and relatable. And so I think a general trend in Canadian schools is that you really want to have a few carrying factors. I understand that not everyone is perfect. There are some people who score like well round, but for instance, if you have a high GPA, perhaps you can focus a bit less on your MCAT because there are schools such as U of T, U Ottawa that don't weigh it as heavily. But if on the other hand, perhaps you finished school and you have to recover from a subpar GPA, then I think the MCAT is a section where is an area where you really have to excel in, just because some schools such as McMaster or Western, as well as Queen's, they can be a lot more forgiving with GPA. Pardon? Oh, with GPA, if you can maybe make that up with your MCAT. So definitely, if you're not doing the hottest in one section, there's always other parts of your application that can really make up for some of your weaknesses. And I think I would just encourage you to not overstress if you're not like the perfect, well-rounded applicant. And so last but not least, on top of a lot of supplementary essays and your ABS, there is the Casper test, which is a situational judgment one. And so personally, I took it twice for Canadian schools. So I took it in my third year of undergrad, and I scored a third quartile, which wasn't strong enough for me to get an interview. And in the subsequent year, I made lots of efforts to improve, to ask for feedback, as well as practice significantly. And fortunately, I was able to get that fourth quartile, which I think played a factor in me getting an Ottawa interview. And so I understand that looking at the slide, there's just so much to juggle. It's really daunting. I would encourage you to take a deep breath. Everyone has their unique strengths. Try to do your best to be well-rounded just to maximize your chances, but do give yourself some grace. Let's say if you were late on building extracurriculars, there's always time for you to engage in different activities and put yourself out of your comfort zone and learn new skills. Let's say if you didn't do too well on the MCAT, there's always retakes and ways to improve, as well as the Casper test. And so I would encourage you to maybe sit down and reflect on some of your strengths as well as weaknesses, whether you're a current applicant in this cycle or in future cycles. I just wanted to give a bit of background context and provide some examples. All right, so moving on to how to tackle the ABS. The autobiographical sketch is used by the Ontario schools in order to get a feel of all the activities, your accomplishments, and your interests, all the great things that you've done since the age of 16. And so I believe the only school that doesn't look at it is McMaster, just because of their grading formula, whereas other schools, they might change it up a bit. For instance, the University of Ottawa only looks at the top 3 of each section. I know Queen's, they don't look at other sections, and they look at activities past high school, so just be a bit cognizant of that. And so in general, I try to encourage students and applicants to really focus on activities that you care about, and don't buy into like the prestige if something sounds good, but you didn't really accomplish anything. Like for instance, like you could be working at McDonald's and being able to positively impact your workplace environment with that positive attitude and all that. I feel like that could be more meaningful than, let's say you worked at a prestigious lab, but there was no work coming out of it. And so that might not be the best example, but what I'm really trying to say is Don't overlook things just because they're not prestigious. And again, alluding to what I mentioned earlier, try to show how you've been growing through your different activities. Let's say you've been like a beginner in something, and then at the end you're able to teach someone else a specific skill that you have. That shows growth, that shows development, and that is a very important quality that can help prepare you for medicine. And oftentimes I like to stress the importance of having long-term activities. It's good to have a balance of both short and long. But let's say if you only worked on something for like a couple of hours or a couple of days, then I'm not sure if you would really want to put that on your ABS, just because your reviewer might be a bit skeptical about the amount of things you accomplished within that activity. And so next off, I think a big tip is to really try to balance things out. Obviously, everyone has different experiences in life. Perhaps someone had to pay a lot of personal life expenses and support their family, which is why they have a lot of employment. And they were not able to volunteer because they had to spend that time working. There's a lot of different situations, but in general, I recommend you to try to balance your activities out. So there's 6 different sections, namely employment, research, extracurriculars, volunteering, awards, and other. So maybe try to get like a decent amount in each section, hopefully a minimum of 3 if you really want to impress Ottawa. And I want to emphasize that you do not need research. I know people who've gone into medical school without any research entries. So don't feel discouraged if that is your case, or if you don't have any type of very cool awards. Like, don't worry, they are looking at you holistically. And so really do your best to show that diversity of entries. And so let's say that you're currently deciding between 2 very similar entries. I would advise you to choose the more unique ones. So for instance, you have like 2 academic awards and 1 other award. Maybe go with the 1 other award as well as the academic award, because it shows different sides of you and makes you seem more well-rounded. Just because a lot of things can be repetitive, I would try to avoid that unless you really need to fill the space. I think in terms of writing your ABS, you really only have 150 characters, which is like 2 lines of point form. So I'd encourage you to get straight to the point, no fluff, list the responsibilities that you had, as well as see if there's any room for you to integrate those CanMeds roles. So for instance, let's say like you're working in retail and you have to address customers' complaints. So if you have like a bit of space, you can be like, address customer complaints patiently with professionalism. Or let's say like you're volunteering at a hospital and you're speaking to patients. So for instance, you can be like, listen to patient stories with sensitivity, or via one-on-one conversations, to be able to like spice things up a bit and add a bit of those buzzwords, even though they shouldn't be the main part of your entry. So always don't forget to just be clear and list your responsibilities, quantify things if you can. So for instance, if you led like a team of 30 execs, or if you worked with 6 organizations, or if you raised like $5,000, I think by quantifying things, it's a lot more clear to your reviewer, and it really like helps you sell yourself and your achievements. It's a lot more compelling than being vague. And so as another tip, I try to prioritize university or post-university entries, just because like some schools like Queen's, they tell you directly that they don't look at high school activities. But on the other hand, don't discredit the things that you did in high school. Perhaps there's like an important hobby you were on student council for all 4 years and you accomplished a lot of great things, or you got like a major scholarship at that time. So I think it's important to have a bit of balance. And last but not least, definitely for your ABS, maybe drop in 1 or 2 hobbies. You can do that in the other section, or if they fit in extracurriculars, you can do that too. It helps to make you seem more human, and it gives your reviewers a bit more insight into who you are outside of academia and all these fancy things. Okay. And so moving on, I've currently been mentoring a lot of applications for UBC just because the NAQ is due tomorrow. But once that is done, I think it's time for everyone to focus on the U of T as well as Western essays if you are eligible. These are the 2 schools that really read your essays as well as give you a chance to go beyond and talk all about your experiences outside of the ABS. And so just to give everyone a bit of background, for U of T, there are 2 brief personal essays, both 250 words, as well as 1 essay that's focused on your ABS, that's 500 words. And so if you didn't know this already, the ABS essay as well as the ABS is assessed separately by 1 reviewer, whereas the brief personal essays are assessed by another reviewer or reviewers. So if you want, you are able to repeat certain ideas because it's not the same person reading all of them. If you have like one really compelling story or experience, you're free to do that. And so my biggest reminder is to simply answer the question. I think oftentimes we feel so convoluted because the prompt can be challenging. We want to really share our exciting narratives. But I find that students often get distracted by these really fancy things, and they go too much into explaining background stories. So for instance, when I wrote about my research, I had 1 sentence max detailing what my research was actually about. And then I went into how I developed skills and my experiences and all of that. And so that's how much you should be spending on background. Just to vocalize it, your reviewer doesn't really care about research that you do. They care about how you did that research, what skills you developed, what lessons that you learned, and how that made you a better researcher, student, and how that will make you a better physician. And so really focus on answering the question, stare at the prompt a few times if you need, perhaps like brainstorm it out loud, and again, answer the question. Because the purpose of the essays are to get to know your thinking process as well as who you are as a person. They want to know your character, your feelings, your values, you. It's called brief personal essay, so it's about you, okay? And to that end, don't forget to be vulnerable. Definitely talk about your feelings. So were you excited to lead this new initiative? Did you feel frustrated when your experiments weren't working out? Definitely be candid about these feelings and how you and the steps you take to overcome them. But don't talk down on yourself. Don't make yourself look bad just because that might not leave the best taste in your reviewer. I think you always want to be honest, but at the same time, talk about how you overcome your challenges and all the great things about yourself, if that makes sense. I can clarify this later. And last but not least, I think to guide the U of T essay writing, if you don't know already, definitely check out the clusters that they have on their website. So they have 4 clusters. I think it's scholar, professional, communicator. Honestly, I should know this, but I don't. I think one of them is advocate. And so what I would do is in the two brief personal essays, I would talk about two each or try to weave in two each. And then in my big essay, I would do my best to talk about as many as I can without forcing it. And so that is essentially the qualities that they are looking for. Based on your experiences, let's say you want some scholarship to fund your research. That in itself demonstrates that you are a scholar and you're conducting research. And perhaps you can talk about how you like collaborated with your lab members or a group of people. And that shows, again, more qualities, right? The clusters you're hitting. And so definitely use those clusters to guide your thinking process and the way you present yourself. And so in terms of the Western University essays, I believe there are 8 core essays, as well as an about you and potentially an access essay if you need to talk about that. And so these essays take quite a long time. I would not recommend procrastinating on them just because you really want to take your time to polish it to the best of your abilities. Essentially, they're pretty straightforward. They ask you a specific prompt. So for instance, your dedication to EDI. And then they're going to ask you to talk about 3 learning lessons that you had within your activity. And so typically I would maybe have like an intro line or like an intro paragraph in which I describe what my activity was, how long I've been doing it, what it means to me or my role. And then I dedicate 3 body paragraphs, each focusing on a specific lesson that I learned. And then if there's space, I would have like a concluding one to wrap things up. And so I think it's really important to have structure just so you don't get lost and you really make sure that you're talking about 3 distinct lessons. And for Western, definitely tie it back to medicine. So for instance, as a summer camp counselor, you learned how to actively listen to your campers and cater to their needs. Likewise, like in medicine, you will use active listening to be able to communicate with your patients and get them to share information and considering their backgrounds and their history, cater towards them in terms of the treatment that you provide, as well as their opinions to provide quality care. So definitely explicitly mention and tie back to medicine. And speaking of that, for the U of T essays, I think it's important to do that in the ABS essay as well, just because you have so much space. You don't necessarily have to do it in the brief personal essays just because there's only 250 words. If you can naturally do so, but like you don't have to because they don't actually ask it. I think some people, they try to force a connection to medicine and rather that might sound kind of inorganic. And so really use your judgment. Let's say if it's like, if you're talking about some advocacy initiative, perhaps you can say similarly, I hope to use these skills to continue advocating for topics that I care about in the field of medicine. So definitely don't forget to tie your lessons back to how that will make you a better physician, especially in the Western essays. And so here are some of the packages that I offer. I've currently been quite booked with UBC ones, but I will be starting to look at U of T as well as Western and ABS ones next week. Usually my packages consist of offline editing where I provide detailed edits as well as comments to help improve the ideas regarding the different essays and topics. And then I have like a one-on-one meeting with you to be able to walk you through the process, answer any questions, and do live edits. I also, in the future, will offer Casper as well as interview prep sessions. And so just if you are interested, definitely get in touch with me. And I'd advise you to book as soon as possible, just because if there's like too much demand, the package might not be available. But in that sense, I would want to redirect you to other amazing consultants that we have at Accepted Together. I think everyone is here to provide you with great advice, and we all really want to help you succeed in your journey towards medicine. So don't be shy and reach out to all of us for help. And I think that's it for me, and I'm really excited to answer any questions that you guys have. So, okay, I'll start with the chat box. Who were your verifiers for your hobbies like piano and crafts if they were not done at school? That's a really great question. So for piano, I actually did like the RCM process. I finished the grade 11 exam, but like since I was 16, I've just been playing recreationally. So I did that under one entry, and then my verifier was an administrator at this music school. And in terms of crafts, so I say that one was a bit more on a personal level. And I asked my friend who collaborated with me to verify. And so you might like think twice. Usually definitely get someone with an organizational email, but occasionally for very like personal things where there's actually no one you can reach out to, I think it's totally okay to just like have a friend in the sense of like a peer who collaborated with you to be able to verify your activity. Hope that helps. Does Western look at your ABS or just the essays? So they call the set of essays the AABS, the abbreviated ABS. And so to my understanding, they don't look at the one you submit to OMSAS. They only look at the 8 or so activities that you really describe in detail. So do keep that in mind when choosing the topics that you want for your essays. What's CanMed? So highly recommend you to search that up. CanMeds are a set of qualities that a physician should have. So this includes being a collaborator, a scholar, a professional, and all these great things. And so all these schools, they want to see that you are already displaying these qualities because that will make you a great physician in the future. And so I definitely recommend you to take a look at them and do your best to incorporate them into your essays as well as your ABS. How did you prep for a Casper the second time around? Okay, this is a very interesting question just because I think the Casper is a really tricky test. I know a lot of people who are very great individuals that sometimes aren't as lucky and they don't score as well on the Casper. I think even though there is some reliability to it, there is a bit of a luck of a draw. But honestly, I think it's really important to know the basics. So for instance, create the non-judgmental environment to approach someone privately, all of those great buzzwords. But essentially, answer the question. Don't get too lost into all of the buzzwords and phrases. And when possible, perhaps integrate some of your personal experience. So maybe briefly mention an example where you also face this dilemma and like what you did. Just because Casper raters have to read so many answers, it'll really help you stand out. And I think other types of advice I have for Casper is to really do as much practice as you can, simulate those environments, and either collaborate with friends or mentors to get feedback. Because sometimes you might think something is important, whereas that might not actually be the case. So really being able to get feedback, I think is helpful. Getting a group of friends, working on scenarios together. Once you practice a lot, it kind of comes to you naturally. And I think this year they have the video component. And so to really get yourself accustomed to it, I would recommend recording yourself how you look when you look at the camera specifically, and how you present yourself, whether or not it's a professional setting, or if you're having a lot of if you're not like looking at the camera, things like that, it's important to consider. And definitely try the mock exam they provide with you on Altuus a few days in advance, just so it doesn't like shock you the night before. Something else I found helpful was briefly consulting the BMO book if you don't know where to start. It really gives you like practical solutions, but over time, like I stopped looking or relying on it, and I would just like learn how to craft my own answers. And you want to be so immersed to the point where you see something and you automatically know what to type. You want to have like a certain framework and structure. And so I'd be happy to chat about that with you if you'd like to know more in detail. Okay. In terms of applications, do we generally include awards and accomplishments mainly from our undergraduate, or are the ones from high school also worth to include? I think you want to have a mix. For instance, let's say you won some international business competition or a music competition or a sports contest in high school at like a crazy level. You definitely want something like that in. And on the other hand, even if it's small, perhaps it's like a video that you created and you won this out of like a few submissions. I think that's really cool as well. So I think it's up to your judgment. Again, stay well-rounded. So for instance, like don't have all of your scholarships or awards be like academic ones where you got them because you had like a high school average or like Dean's honor list. Like definitely show more of yourself to the schools that are looking at you. And so yeah, again, I think it's important to just like have a balance. Don't discredit your high school ones, but let's say if you have to like choose between someone, like if you have like you got the top mark in grade 10 chemistry versus like an admission scholarship that's worth like $1,000 or $5,000, then I would obviously go with like the undergrad one and perhaps use that space for another section, if that helps. How did you navigate the ABS essays for U of T? I wanted to include all clusters, but found it hard to do it with just one experience, especially Scholar. That's a great question. So I don't think you should necessarily force all the clusters. I think even like 2 or 3 is okay. Perhaps incorporate more than one, just because it is a lot of space. You have 500 words. But for instance, if you're leading like a volunteering initiative and you're doing meaningful work, you're supporting people in the community, you're raising money, you wouldn't be able to tie that into Scholar inherently. And so that's totally okay. Whereas let's say you're doing like a research entry, then you may or may not be able to tie that into advocate depending on the nature of your research. So again, don't force yourself, don't pressure yourself to be able to incorporate all those clusters. Really focus on how your activity genuinely shows a few of those clusters. Does the lesson for Western essays have to relate to the prompt, teamwork, respect for ADI, etc.? Good question. So the answer is no. Sometimes I would relate it to the prompt, sometimes I wouldn't. So for instance, I had an EDI essay about being a camp counselor and being able to work with kids of all ages and backgrounds. And so to that note, one of the lessons that I might have learned was how to use active listening, right? And then in another paragraph, maybe I did have like a lesson where I actually enforced values of EDI to my students. And so it goes both ways. You can have it relate to the prompt, and you can also have something that's totally different. So yeah, don't limit yourself to just the prompt. Feel free to talk about any other skills or any types of knowledge that you really learned from that activity that's related to the prompt. Can you send the link to your packages? Yes. So if you scan this QR code, you are able to see my profile and check out some of my packages. And then once you're on the website, you can also check out the other services and consultants. You being someone who got into multiple medical schools, they all must have saw something in you that made you think you would be a good doctor. What do you think that was? Okay. Ooh. So I think I was someone who was really cognizant about my strengths and my passions. So I think first off, just to be transparent, I did have a very high GPA going in, as you can tell from some of the schools that I was accepted in. But on the other hand, as you can tell, my MCAT wasn't necessarily as good. And so that, in a sense, was a personal weakness. And so to make up for that, I really engaged myself in a lot of activities to make myself a more rounded person and to really just gain more life experience. And being able to translate that onto written form, onto my essays, was, I think, probably like the strength that the committee saw in me. And I was fortunate to be able to receive mentorship from friends. And so I think it's really important, just because you have really good experiences, if you're not able to translate that effectively, they might not be able to tell how amazing of a person you are and all the great things that you do. So definitely get those edits, come across as vulnerable, genuine, and really show your passion and dedication for the activities that you've done for medicine. I think that's how they maybe thought I was a good fit. Again, being able to demonstrate those CAN meds, I was able to somehow convince them like I'm a good scholar or communicator. I think maybe that stood out to them. So yeah. Another question, what was it about your Western application that you think got you accepted into that school specifically? How did you stand out with other people with high stats? Okay, so I think Western is actually one of the schools that are more generous in terms of GPA. They take your best 2 years, and you need like a 3.7, I think. And I'm not even sure if they actually assess your GPA competitively past that point. It's really the 8 to 10 essays that you look at. And so I think that is the most important part of the Schulich Med application. And so I did spend a significant amount of time working on those essays. I really did create like a brainstorming sheet. So I would choose like the activities that best fit, for example, the problem solving prompt, the teamwork prompt, the EDI prompt, and like the service prompt. And I would try not to repeat any, just to really show more sides of myself. And then afterwards, I would really reflect on 3 different lessons for each prompt. And having this outline really helped guided my actual essay writing. If possible, try to have 3 times 8, 24 different lessons if you can do so. It will make your essays very interesting to read. So definitely reflect hard on your experiences. Create like an outline, the lessons you want to hit home, and then just talk about like your responsibilities, any important background stories. Be specific, provide examples. So let's say I crafted with children at hospitals. I think just saying that is way too vague. You need to be like, oh, for instance, there was like a time when this girl who was initially shy and closed off, I was able to really connect with them through small talks as we crafted together. So by being specific and having actual examples, it really helps to make your essays a lot more engaging and compelling, as well as, again, have those clear, distinct lessons and tie them back to medicine appropriately. I think those are like the general formula I used in terms of preparing for those Western essays. And I was like, again, very fortunate to be able to have edits on those essays just because even things like grammar or making things sound better, even minor things like that can really make a difference. So yeah, thank you for asking that question. Um, have fun with those essays. They are really tedious, but you'll be after you write them, I think you will feel a sense of accomplishment. Like, wow, like I've done so many great things that I should be proud of. Okay, so yeah, the session is ending. Thank you guys so much for attending today. Um, feel free to reach out to me on Accepted Together if you have any questions. I would be happy to provide guidance, and just if you're confused about anything, please reach out. And if you're interested in my packages, that'd be really cool too. I look forward to connecting with you all.